I never wanted to become a doctor. That might sound strange to say, especially while wearing the white coat, the symbol of a profession seen as sacred and admirable. But it's the truth. To me, medicine felt like a gilded cage, glamorous, full of expectations, but it trapped my soul for years. I'm Susan Hartley, the only daughter of two top surgeons at Boston General, a hospital they've dedicated their lives to. To everyone else, I'm Dr. Hartley, the brilliant daughter carrying on the family legacy, always smiling in graduation photos, new medical center openings, and annual healthcare galas. But behind that polished exterior, I live another life, one my family has no idea about. In the quiet world of art, I am Celeste Gray, a name unknown just a few years ago, but now one of the most sought-after contemporary artists in New York. My paintings hang in Manhattan's prestigious galleries, with pieces auctioned for hundreds of thousands of dollars. And the irony is, no one knows that Celeste Gray and Dr. Susan Hartley are the same person. This morning, standing in the grand lobby of Boston General, freshly renovated for the new specialty care wing, I felt the cruel irony of fate sharper than ever. The new center launched its Healing Through Art initiative, and right there on the main wall was my latest painting, a vibrant, abstract piece pulsing with life, like a heart mid-beat. Sold anonymously under the name Celeste Gray, it went for $1,800,000. The person who signed off the budget for that piece was my mother. She stood next to me, tilting her head with a puzzled expression. "I don't understand modern art," she muttered, lips pursed. "Just messy streaks of color. Almost $2 million for this? What was the hospital board thinking?" I gave a strained smile, trying to keep my voice calm. Maybe they wanted to add some warmth to a space that feels too sterile. My father arrived, his white coat crisp, holding a thick patient file. "Well, at least it makes this place look less like a morgue," he muttered, then turned to me. "Still, I think they should have spent that money on upgrading the MRI machines." I bit my lip, hiding my reaction. If they knew those messy streaks came from the sleepless nights I spent sneaking away from shifts to paint, that I used the money from that very piece to fund the pediatric wing, how would they look at me? That night, after a grueling 30-hour shift, I didn't go home. Instead, I slipped quietly into my tiny studio in Brooklyn, the only place I could truly breathe. No stethoscope, no mask, no suffocating expectations, just colors, light, and raw emotion. I turned on some music, took off my medical watch, slipped out of my white coat, and put on my paint-stained smock. On the easel was a half-finished canvas, deep reds tangled with purples, like a heart both crushed and screaming for freedom. I picked up my brush without thinking. Pain, pressure, all of it poured out in each stroke. Each line felt like it was ripping open my chest, revealing the part of me my parents never wanted to see. The desire to live for something real. But my story didn't start in a hospital or New York gallery. It began 10 years ago. When I was 17, standing in our living room, hands trembling around an acceptance letter from the Rhode Island School of Design, facing my father's cold, cutting gaze. "You think we've sacrificed all these years for you just to become a painter?" he said, his voice low but sharp enough to make the china in the cabinet rattle. From that moment I knew, if I wanted to keep my family, I had to bury the most important part of myself. I remember that night vividly. The night I lost the right to choose for myself. It was a late spring evening in the Boston suburbs, with the last cherry blossoms still clinging to the trees in our front yard. I had just received the email confirming my full scholarship to RISD, one of my biggest dreams. My heart pounded as I opened the message, my hands shaking with excitement. Part of me wanted to scream with joy. The other part feared what would happen once I told my parents. I walked into the living room, letter in hand. My father was reading a medical journal, my mother jotting down notes for her conference schedule in San Francisco. I stood between them, took a deep breath, and held out the letter. They gave me a full scholarship. They said they've never seen anyone with my color technique at 18. I said, my voice shaking but my eyes full of hope. My father glanced at the letter for a second, then folded it calmly. You're still going to Middleton Medical, just like we planned. This is just a teenage phase, Susan. But I'm not just drawing for fun anymore. I'm serious. They picked me from thousands. I want to study art. I want to work with people like me. People like you? My mother interrupted, her voice even and cold. You're the daughter of 2 of the top doctors in this city. You've been in pre-med for 3 years. Perfect SAT science scores, accepted to Middleton. You are not some starving artist. I don't want to be a doctor, I whispered, feeling like I had just committed a sin. My father's eyes darkened. You think being an artist is easy? Look at your cousin Mark. He studied music composition. Now he's working at a convenience store, living off handouts. That's the future you want? I clenched my fists, trying to stay calm. I'm not Mark. I have passion. I have purpose. I can't just give that up. You're not giving up anything, my mother said coldly, ending the conversation. We've invested everything into your medical future. We don't invest in delusions. From that moment, my life veered down a path I never chose. I declined the scholarship, withdrew from RISD, and enrolled at Middleton Medical, the same school my parents once attended and now taught at. People called me the next Hartley legacy, proud and full of expectations with every word. But I felt suffocated. By day, I studied anatomy, cardiology, neurology, dissected soulless models. At night, once the world went quiet, I snuck off to a small attic studio in Dorchester I paid for with my own savings. That's where I became myself again. That's where I was, Celeste Gray. I chose that name one winter night, snow falling beyond the worn glass window. Celeste for the blue of the sky, Gray for the dull gray of the life I was trapped in. A name both dreamy and grounded, the perfect mask for my truth. I painted non-stop, as if each drop of color on the canvas could say what I never dared speak. I sent my work to an independent gallery in New York with a short email. I'm new, but my art will make you look twice. Don't ask for my real name, just call me Celeste Gray. I expected nothing. But a week later, I got a reply from the gallery owner. Ethan Blair. Your work has something unique, a sense of control without losing emotion. Send me 3 more pieces. Let's begin. And that was when the 2 worlds began to form. By day, I was a top medical student. By night, I became an anonymous artist, creating paintings critics described as raw, intuitive, as if each stroke was a heartbeat. That first year, I sold a painting for $25,000, my first income from art. I didn't spend a cent, I saved it, as proof that the path I once dreamed of wasn't a fantasy. I painted more, lived less. During hospital shifts, I jotted down symptoms, but also noticed expressions, hands, eyes, everything I would later translate onto canvas. They say art reflects life, but for me, art is the only place I'm truly alive. I don't know how long I can maintain this double life, but one thing I know for sure, if the truth ever comes out, I'll either lose my family or lose myself. And I wasn't sure if next time I would still choose to sacrifice. Throughout my years at Middleton Medical, I learned how to hide the brightest parts of myself behind a composed gaze and a meticulously professional demeanor. My schedule was so packed that an average person would have likely burned out. Classes from morning till evening, overnight shifts. And when the city finally slept, I would throw myself into a small studio just to let my heart breathe. Ironically, the more exhausted I was physically, the more intensely I painted. The stress, the pressure, the sleepless nights. All of it spilled out in layered strokes, full of emotion, yet astonishingly controlled. That's when I began to realize medical knowledge didn't take me away from art. On the contrary, it gave me a completely different lens. I no longer painted only with emotion. I painted with deep anatomical understanding. Muscle groups, blood vessels, bone structures. I infused them into my art like a symphony of science and instinct. My work started to develop a unique voice. Not purely abstract, not fully realistic, but something in between. Sharp as a scalpel, yet soft as morning mist. In my second year of med school, after a 40-hour shift with no sleep, I painted a triptych in a single night. When I finished, I collapsed on the floor from exhaustion, paint still on my hands. Ethan, my gallery rep in New York, exhibited them in an independent art show. Within just 3 hours, the entire set was bought by a Swiss collector for $180,000. I couldn't believe it when Ethan called me during a dissection lab and simply said, "Congrats, Celeste. We've just entered a new level." I couldn't tell anyone. My classmates thought I was buried in textbooks, my professors saw me as a model student, and my parents texted proud messages every time I topped an exam. And me? I quietly wired that first big payment into a separate account, then went back to learning anatomy as if nothing had happened. After that, my artwork started gaining more attention. Critics began describing Celeste Gray with odd phrases, surgical brushstrokes, emotion structured through anatomy, an improbable fusion of science and soul. Ethan warned me never to reveal my identity. They love the mystery. A med student by day, a famous painter by night, no one will believe it's true, and that's exactly why they can't stop looking at your work. I guarded that secret like a flame, one that both sustained me and could burn everything down at any moment. And so, the years passed. I studied and painted, healed and created. Sometimes I wondered how much of me was living authentically, but every time I stood in the OR or faced a blank canvas, I knew. Both of those people were me. Not split. Not fake. By my final year, I had sold over 24 pieces. One painting I made on Christmas night, while others gathered with family and I was on call in the ER, was auctioned at a Paris charity gala for a record $650,000. That painting, titled Heartbeat in the Snow, depicted a real human heart. But instead of red, I used cold blues and shimmering silvers. By graduation, I had earned over $5 million, enough to buy a small island off the coast of Maine. Something Ethan half-joked about every time we planned Celeste's next getaway. "You know," he once said while we sipped coffee at a little cafe in Soho, "Celeste Gray could disappear any time, but Susan Hartley will always exist as a doctor. That's fascinating." I just smiled. Fascinating? Maybe, but also deeply conflicting. Every time my artwork made a magazine cover, I couldn't share it with friends. Every time a reporter requested an interview with Celeste Gray, I declined, saying, "She doesn't appear in public." That double life felt perfectly balanced. Until the night Ethan called me near midnight, his voice buzzing with excitement and worry. "Celeste, do you know? Your latest piece was just chosen as the centerpiece for the Modern Art Museum's new exhibit. They want to hang it in the central atrium, but they're requesting the artist attend the opening." I froze. Part of me wanted to nod, step into the light, tell the world who I was. But the other part, the one that knew my parents would never forgive me, whispered, "Don't." I hadn't answered yet, but deep down I knew. My double life was approaching its greatest test. And maybe, the moment everything I'd worked so hard to hide would unravel. I had no idea it would all begin to fall apart because of one painting. Last week, Boston General, the hospital where I had just completed my residency, hosted the grand opening of its new pediatric center, a project my parents had championed for nearly a decade. It was their pride, their legacy fulfilled, and I had been invited as a standout young physician. I arrived in my white coat, composed and polished as always, masking the storm inside. What I didn't expect was the painting displayed prominently in the main lobby, my latest work, Breathing Between the Pauses, an abstract piece of chaotic interwoven color streaks anchored by a single thin golden rhythm line running across it, a symbol of perseverance amidst disorder. I had submitted it to the gallery in New York under the name Celeste Gray just a month prior. Ethan said a medical organization bought it for $2 million. I didn't ask who. And now it was here, right in front of my parents. My mother tilted her head, frowning slightly. "I don't get it," she murmured. "Modern art feels jarring. Why put this right at the entrance? It makes patients uneasy, not calm." I tried to stay composed, but my fingers tightened around my coffee cup. My father stepped up beside her, hands in his pockets, eyes as cold as ever. He looked at the painting with near disdain. "Wish they'd spent that money on better ventilators for the ICU," he muttered. $2 million for a shapeless mess. Ridiculous." I turned away. My heart pounded, not with anger, but with the realization that the truth couldn't stay hidden much longer. Ethan was right. Things were moving faster than I'd imagined. Just 2 days later, I got a message from Ethan. "Urgent. New York Times is prepping a feature to expose Celeste Gray's real identity. Someone from the medical field leaked info. They noticed you're always off shift during her exhibits. You may need to act fast." I stared at the screen. Outside my window, the September sky was overcast. The wind rattled the old oak trees. I'd been so careful, switching shifts, hiding my work, never showing my face. But I underestimated the constant eyes in the hospital, the curiosity about the too quiet doctor. "Can we stop them?" I asked Ethan over the phone, my voice shaking. "No, unless you confirm or deny it." "But denying won't work. You need to decide. And if you want, I can arrange for Celeste Gray to make her first public appearance at MoMA's opening." I sat on a park bench near the hospital. An elderly woman passed by, holding the hand of a little girl skipping along. Neither of them knew I was holding 2 lives together by the thinnest of threads, about to snap. I looked down at my hand, still stained with blue paint from last night's piece, silence in the curved line. I once believed secrecy was the only way to survive, but now, as everything threatened to come to light, I wondered, if I told the truth on my own terms, could it change everything? That evening, I sent an email to MoMA's organizers. "Celeste Gray will appear at the upcoming exhibit opening. I will speak the truth. No anonymity, no hiding." Then I sent another message, for the first time, inviting my parents to an art event. "Mom, Dad, Friday night, 7 p.m., MoMA. There's something I need to share." No long explanation, no plea, just one chance, if they still wanted to listen. The next 3 days passed like a stretched wire. Rumors spread through the hospital. Art forums buzzed with "Celeste Gray revealed?" Some even placed bets on my real identity. I avoided social media, buried myself in work. But every time I walked past that painting in the lobby, I felt like I was seeing my own heart exposed. Friday night, the museum was packed. Soft lights glowed on a velvet curtain hiding the night's centerpiece, The Woman of Two Worlds. A painting of a woman in a white coat, but her shadow behind her held a paintbrush. Colorful lines formed a heartbeat, some misaligned. As if that heart had once lost its rhythm, then found it again. I stood backstage. Outside were the press, colleagues, strangers, and my parents. Ethan gave my hand a gentle squeeze. "Your moment. Do it your way, Susan." I nodded and stepped into the light. The lights in the auditorium dimmed. The room seemed to hold its breath. I stood backstage, gripping the hem of my ash-gray silk dress. Hand-painted by me, each flower a year I had hidden in silence. The dress was light, but my feet felt like they were treading across clouds made of stone. Behind the black velvet curtain stood my parents, my colleagues who only knew me as Dr. Susan Hardley, the media, the critics, and Ethan, silently praying this wouldn't turn into chaos. The host stepped up to the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, after years of anonymity, the artist Celeste Gray, whose works have redefined contemporary art, will appear before the public for the first time." I walked out. The spotlight swung toward me, blinding. The whispers swelled into waves. I heard soft gasps, camera shutters clicking like rainfall, and then I saw them. My father, standing tall, hands clasped behind his back, face expressionless. My mother, frozen in her seat, eyes wide, as if everything around her had turned to stone. I inhaled deeply, still holding the microphone I hadn't realized I picked up. "My name is Susan Hartley," I began, my voice steadier than I'd imagined. "And I am also Celeste Gray." The words rang out, sharp and irrevocable. The room went silent. The pause stretched, endless. Then the cameras erupted again, this time like a storm. A reporter shouted, "Aren't you a doctor?" Another called out, "You donated $2 million to Boston General? Is that your money?" I looked straight at my parents, as if the rest of the world had faded into fog. "The painting in the main lobby of the pediatric center? The one you said made you uncomfortable, Mom? That was mine. I sold it under the name Celeste and used the money to fund the pediatric respiratory program." My mother still didn't react. Her face was pale, hands clenched around her purse. "And that wasn't the first time," I continued. "Over the past 4 years, I've quietly donated over $5 million to medical foundations, most of it for expanding the autism program here at Boston General." A soft gasp echoed from the left side of the room. Then a few hesitant claps, and more followed. I turned to the host. He nodded. The large curtain behind me slowly rose, revealing the centerpiece of the exhibit. The Woman of Two Worlds. The hall grew unusually quiet. The painting showed a woman standing between two realms. One side, a sterile, glaring white surgical room. The other, a vibrant, colorful studio. The woman wore a white coat, but held a paintbrush in her hand. Her shadow behind her was both doctor and artist, two forms merged into one, inseparable. I heard my mother's breath hitch. She raised her hand to cover her mouth. My father's gaze flickered, his usually rigid shoulders slumped slightly, like something heavy had finally fallen away. When the applause rose again, this time thunderous and clear, I turned to Ethan. He smiled, eyes brighter than I'd ever seen. But I didn't care about the press or the praise. All I waited for was the reaction from the only two people I had ever longed to be seen by. My mother stood, slowly. Her eyes were red-rimmed. I thought she'd be angry. Or disappointed. But she stopped in front of me and whispered, just loud enough for me to hear. "So, all those lines? You learned them from anatomy?" I nodded. "And from emotions I wasn't allowed to show." She looked at me for a long time. Then, turning to the crowd, she spoke clearly. I don't understand art, but I know I've never seen a painting that hurt my heart this deeply. And now, I understand why." My father hadn't moved. But then he stepped forward. He didn't speak at first, just looked at the painting for a while, then turned to me. "We taught you to study detail, but you used that to see everything we missed." I didn't know if that was forgiveness, but I knew it was a beginning. And maybe, for the first time, they saw me not just as a doctor, not just as an artist, but as a whole, real person. After that night, my life was never the same. The next day, the news exploded with headlines. "Young doctor is also million-dollar artist. Celeste Gray is Susan Hartley, daughter of Boston's top surgeons?" At Boston General, colleagues looked at me differently. Some with admiration, some with doubt. But I was used to that. Living between two worlds had never been easy. A few days later, when I returned for my first shift since going public, something unexpected happened. I passed the main lobby of the pediatric center, where, breathing between the pauses, still hung proudly on the white stone wall. Below it, a new brass plaque had been added, engraved with a work by Dr. Susan Hartley, where art doesn't just heal hearts, but touches souls. From May 22nd, it was doomed. I stood in front of it for a long time, until my father walked up, as quiet as ever. He didn't speak right away, just stared at the painting, longer than I'd ever seen him look at anything not related to medicine. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and rough. "You painted a real human heart and kept its rhythm alive. That's no small feat." I turned to him, stunned. My father, who had always seen art as unrealistic, was now praising the feeling in my painting. He continued, more slowly. "I taught you to read the body's map, but you painted a map of emotions I never understood, and maybe I never wanted to." For the first time, I saw his eyes soften, as if every expectation, every pressure he had unknowingly placed on me, was starting to lift. I didn't know what to say, just that something heavy inside me had finally been let go. That day, during a hospital board meeting, my father, the most respected voice in the room, stood up during a debate about whether the painting in the lobby should be auctioned off for a hospital fundraiser. "No," he said firmly, "we keep it. Not just for its artistic value, but for its human value. It's a reminder that when we stop forcing people to choose one path, they can create something none of us ever imagined." After the meeting, he even proposed adding the painting to a new training module on art-based communication in medicine, an initiative I had never imagined could exist at Boston General. As for my mother, she visited my studio for the first time one rainy afternoon. She didn't bring flowers or gifts, just a clear umbrella and a small box of homemade apple pie. She stood by the shelf of canvases, gently touched an unfinished piece, then said, "Do you remember how I used to scold you for drawing on the walls? I scrubbed them all clean, but now I wish I had saved one." I froze. Her voice wasn't trembling, nor soft, it was simply honest. A truth long overdue but no longer hidden. "I don't understand this world," she said, glancing over the scattered palettes. "But I'm learning. I just signed up for a beginner's painting class at the community center." I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I felt an impossible weight lift. For a moment, I felt like a child again, finally allowed to draw on the walls without getting scolded. Since then, things haven't been perfect. I'm still a doctor, still have exhausting days and sleepless shifts, but I also paint more, publicly. And for the first time in my life, I'm no longer hiding who I am. The hospital opened a small gallery for artwork created by medical staff, with me as its curator. Doctors who once dismissed abstract art now try to express their emotions after tough ER nights. What moves me most is that every morning, after finishing his night shift, my father stops in front of The Woman of Two Worlds hanging in the staff lounge. Not to analyze the composition, but just to stand there, as if he's quietly speaking to his daughter, not the doctor, not the artist, but simply me. And I finally learned how to forgive. Not because they fully understood me, but because they were trying. And sometimes, trying to see each other with new eyes is the truest way to love. Within just a few weeks after the MoMA exhibition, everything changed so quickly I could barely catch my breath. My name, both names, appeared across every headline, from prestigious art magazines to top medical journals. Celeste Gray is Susan Hartley, the doctor who paints emotion's pulse, when anatomy meets art, and the story of a heart that refused to be split. Not just the art world, but the medical community started speaking up too. Medical schools in California, Illinois, and even Harvard Medical invited me to speak at conferences on the topic of bridging emotion and expertise. A concept once seen as vague now sparked passionate conversations everywhere. Boston General officially launched the art therapy program for inpatients and medical staff, with me as the director. What started as a small experiment soon drew in hundreds of participants. Painting sessions after shifts became a space where doctors, nurses, and techs could release exhaustion through color and form, not charts and diagnoses. One day, I saw Dr. Michael Simmons, the former chief of internal medicine, known for his strictness, quietly blending oil pastels beside a terminal cancer patient. No words were spoken, but I knew something had changed. Not in my position, but in how people had begun to understand what healing truly meant. My Brooklyn studio, once my hiding place, became an open space for weekend classes, where I taught young patients how to express their inner world through brushes. The first painting hung on the classroom wall was by a 7-year-old girl. Her heart wasn't red, but purple, surrounded by tiny golden dots. She called it a heart that shines in the dark. I can't count how many times I've choked up looking at things like that, because to me that is the purest form of art. Not fame, not auctions, just honesty. From someone who once lived a double life, I now live one life, fully. Every morning, I walk into the hospital carrying my worn leather bag, with both a stethoscope and a sketchbook inside. My white coat now bears a new name tag, Dr. Susan Hartley/Celeste Gray. There's nothing left to hide. Breathing between the pauses is now protected by UV glass, proudly displayed in the hospital's main lobby. Below it is a small brass plaque engraved in 2 fonts, one formal, one graceful. Dr. Susan Hartley, Celeste Gray. Where medicine and art meet, where the heart doesn't just beat, but feels. Every time I walk past it, I see patients stop to read. Some smile, some touch the glass, some turn to their children and say, "She's mommy's doctor." And every time, I know stepping into the light that night was the best decision I ever made. One early autumn afternoon, I was invited back to Middleton Medical School, the place where I once buried my true self for years, to give a speech at the opening ceremony. I stood at the podium, looking out at hundreds of students, most just 18 or 19, full of hope, but also confusion, just like I once was. "I used to think success only came when you wore the white coat," I said, my voice echoing through the hall. "But now I understand. True success comes when you no longer have to choose between the different parts of yourself." The room went silent. Then, long applause erupted. Not because I was a doctor, not exactly because I was an artist, but because I was someone who dared to live honestly. After the ceremony, a young female student approached me hesitantly. "Do you think it's possible to study medicine and still write poetry?" she asked. I didn't answer right away. I looked at her and remembered myself 10 years ago, holding an acceptance letter to art school, voice trembling under my parents' cold stares. "Not only is it possible," I smiled, "sometimes it's the very thing that makes you a great doctor." That night, when I got home, I opened the door to my studio. A fresh canvas waited on the easel, bathed in soft yellow light. I placed my hand on a brush and began to paint. Not as Celeste Gray, not as a hidden persona, but as me, Susan Hartley, someone who no longer feared living in full color. From a girl once paralyzed by the fear of rejection for not choosing the path others had set, I've learned that true worth isn't in pleasing anyone. It's in daring to be true to yourself. Today, I no longer choose between medicine and art. I am both. My story isn't just about success. It's about freedom. Freedom to heal, to create, and to become my whole self, without asking for permission. What do you think about Susan's journey? Would you have the courage to follow your passion like she did? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to follow the channel for more touching and meaningful stories about family and life. 3 years later, I stood at the window of our new top-floor office, watching the Chicago skyline stretch beneath the sunset. This city, once the place I came to with nothing but a suitcase, was now where Ryan and I had built a thriving financial empire. Reynolds and Carter Capital, the investment firm we founded, had become a leader in funding sustainable businesses. We helped small companies find the capital to grow, backed clean energy projects, and proved that profitability didn't have to come at the cost of sustainability. Everything happened faster than I expected. We started with a tiny office and a handful of employees. But after the first year, Ryan's reputation and sharp investment choices drove steady growth. I took on the role of COO, building out strong operational systems while Ryan focused on strategy and partnership expansion. We were the perfect team, not just in business, but in life. My life had completely transformed. I was no longer the girl frozen in front of a kitchen door, listening to her mother tear her down with a calm voice. I was no longer a confused young woman in a strange city, struggling to find a job just to get by. I was Julia Carter, and I was proud of who I had become. That evening, Ryan and I sat on the couch in our apartment, wine glasses in hand, unwinding after a long day. The company had achieved incredible success, and I couldn't believe that just 3 years earlier we were working out of a cramped little office. Ryan set his glass down and looked at me with thoughtful eyes. "Julia," he began, "I want to talk to you about a deal." I raised an eyebrow. "What kind of deal?" He paused, then pulled a folder from the glass table and slid it toward me. I opened it, and my eyes quickly scanned the printed lines. I recognized the name immediately. Sterling and Dawson Capital. My hand froze, my heart pounded. It was the firm Rachel and William had started together, after betraying me. They had found quick success, leveraging Rachel's industry reputation and their combined connections. But from what I was reading now, things had taken a turn. Sterling and Dawson was on the edge of collapse. Ryan continued, watching me closely. Their firm is drowning in debt. High-risk investments didn't pay off like they expected. They're scrambling to stay afloat, but investors are losing confidence. He paused, then said the most important part. They're looking for a partner to bail them out. I looked up at Ryan, narrowing my eyes slightly. You're saying they want to sell the company?" He nodded. "And I want us to buy it." The air grew heavy. I closed the folder, trying to steady myself. "Why?" I asked, my voice dropping low. "Ryan, you know what they did to me. Why would you want to do this?" Ryan leaned back in his chair, eyes still fixed on me. "Because it's a good deal, Julia. Their firm has a few promising clients and some unfinished projects that could turn profitable with the right management. We can restructure it to align with our values." I stayed silent, fingers tightening around the wine glass. 3 years ago, Rachel and William thought they had won. They took the man I loved, crushed my dignity, and used their status to build their success. And now they were standing at the edge of failure, while I was the one holding their future in my hands. "Julia," Ryan said gently, as if reading my thoughts, "I'm not suggesting this as revenge. I want you to see it as a business opportunity. You'd have the power to lead it, the way you want." I took a deep breath, then slowly set my glass down. "All right," I said, my voice calmer than I expected. "But I have one condition." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "What condition?" I leaned forward, eyes steady. "If we acquire Sterling and Dawson, I want to run it directly. I'll be the one to decide who stays, who goes, and how the company is operated." Ryan smiled. A proud, approving smile. "I wouldn't expect anything less." I sat up straight, a strange calm washing over me. This wasn't revenge. This was control. This was agency. 3 years ago, they thought I wasn't strong enough to move on. Now, they were about to face a new reality. Not only had I moved on, I'd come farther than they ever imagined. 3 months later, the Reynolds and Carter Capital Gala was held at a luxury hotel in downtown Chicago, marking a major milestone in the company's growth. It wasn't just an anniversary event. It was a statement. We had officially completed the acquisition of Sterling and Dawson Capital. The company Rachel and William once proudly built was now under my control. After a full restructuring, I had let go of most of the old staff, kept a few talented individuals, and reshaped the company based on the new values I believed in. And tonight, everyone who mattered in the finance industry was in attendance, including Rachel, William, and my mother. Ryan knew I had gone back and forth about whether to invite them. When I finally made my decision, he simply nodded. "Are you sure?" he asked. I nodded. "I want them to see who I am now." The party unfolded in a dazzling space, with crystal lights reflecting off elegant gowns and tailored suits. I wore a sapphire blue gown, sleek and tasteful, nothing too flashy, and my hair was softly curled and loose. Ryan, as always, looked impeccable in a classic black tuxedo. As the room filled with guests, I played the perfect host, Greeting, shaking hands, discussing our company's new direction. But the moment Rachel and William walked in, I knew they had seen me. Rachel looked different from the last time I saw her. The confidence and power she once carried had faded, replaced by a trace of tension in her eyes. William looked tired, the dark circles under his eyes giving him away. They stood at the entrance, stunned as they took in the setting. And then my mother appeared. She wore an expensive dress, her face meticulously made up, her smile slightly strained as her eyes landed on me. As I calmly walked toward them, she was the first to speak. "Julia, you look stunning." I kept a polite smile. Not cold, but not exactly warm either. "Thank you, Mom. So do you." Rachel looked me up and down, her expression showing clear discomfort. "I'll admit, I didn't think you'd make it this far," she said, trying to sound composed. I took a sip of champagne, smiling. Not everyone gets the chance to prove themselves after being stepped on. William said nothing, just watched me silently, as if trying to figure out who I had become. Ryan approached, resting a hand gently on my back, a quiet signal that I wasn't standing alone anymore. "Good evening, everyone," he said, his tone calm but firm. "Hope you're enjoying the party." Rachel pressed her lips together, glancing at Ryan, then back at me. "So, this is why you succeeded?" I let out a soft laugh. "You think I needed a man to get here?" I tilted my head. "You're mistaken. Ryan and I are partners. We built Reynolds and Carter Capital together, brick by brick." My mother cut in, grabbing my hand dramatically. "Julia, I know things in the past hurt you, but I always believed you could do something great." I looked at her, eyes calm. "You never believed in me. You only believed in what you wanted me to become." She blinked, as if about to say something, then stayed silent. I realized in that moment she wasn't here to mend anything. She was here to reconnect. Because I had finally made it. Rachel crossed her arms, her tone tinged with sarcasm. "Anyway, this company used to be mine and William's. You must be pretty satisfied sitting in our old seats." I shrugged. "Not really. I didn't buy the company to get revenge. I did it because it was a smart deal. It's just a shame. It could have been something much bigger if the people running it weren't so arrogant." Rachel's face went pale. William looked down at his drink, silent. I didn't feel victorious. There was no thrill or satisfaction in seeing them like this. Only relief. If they hadn't betrayed me, I wouldn't be standing here today. If my mother hadn't dismissed me as useless, I'd never have had the drive to prove her wrong. I didn't need their approval anymore. "I wish you and Willem the best," I said, offering a soft smile. "I hope you both find what truly matters to you." And with that, I turned away, leaving them standing in the middle of the glittering ballroom. Ryan looked at me, his eyes gentle. "You okay?" I took a deep breath, then smiled. More than ever, tonight wasn't about revenge. Tonight was about owning who I was. The gala ended around midnight, as the last guests departed with warm congratulations and firm handshakes. I stood on the rooftop of the hotel, the cool breeze brushing past me, my eyes taking in the glowing lights of Chicago below. Ryan stepped beside me, handing me a glass of wine. "Come on, you deserve a moment to enjoy this." I smiled, taking the glass. You know, I used to think that when this day came, I'd feel victorious, that I'd feel satisfied seeing Rachel and William fall. Ryan didn't say anything. He just tilted his head, listening. I took a deep breath, letting the cool night air fill my lungs. "But I don't feel that way." I turned to face him. "There's no gloating, no satisfaction, just relief." Ryan smiled, gently placing a hand on my back. "That's because you've come so much farther than they ever did, Julia. You don't need to prove anything anymore." I nodded and took a sip of wine. I no longer carried the weight of needing to prove to my mother that I wasn't a failure. I didn't need validation from Rachel or William. They had once been central figures in my life, but now they were simply part of the past. A past that had led me to this incredible present. Ryan took my hand, his fingers warm and steady. "I have something for you." I raised an eyebrow, watching as he pulled a small velvet box from his jacket pocket. My heart skipped. He opened the box to reveal a simple, stunning diamond ring. "Julia, since the day you came into my life, everything changed. You're not just my business partner. You're the one who made me a better version of myself. I can't imagine this life without you." My breath caught as I looked into his blue eyes. There wasn't a trace of doubt in them. Ryan knelt down, right there under the starlit Chicago sky. "Will you marry me?" I let out a soft laugh, tears welling in my eyes. "You know, I used to think I didn't believe in love anymore." I glanced at the ring, then back at him. "But then you came along, and you made me believe that love isn't about sacrifice or loss. It's about partnership and mutual respect." Ryan gently squeezed my hand. "So, will you partner with me for the rest of our lives?" I didn't hesitate. "Yes," I whispered, nodding. "I will." He stood, sliding the ring onto my finger, then pulled me into a tight embrace. I closed my eyes, feeling his heartbeat, his warm breath in my hair. I was no longer the girl standing in that kitchen, crushed by a mother who told her she wasn't enough. I was no longer the woman betrayed and lost in a strange city. I was Julia Carter. I was the woman who rebuilt her life from the ruins. And I had truly made it. 1 year later. Springtime in Chicago was beautiful. I sat in my office, watching the trees slowly turn green again, thinking about everything that had happened over the past 4 years. Ryan and I had gotten married in an intimate ceremony by Lake Michigan, surrounded only by our closest friends and chosen family, the people who had supported us every step of the way. Reynolds and Carter Capital continued to thrive, expanding into new areas. But for me, success wasn't just about money or recognition anymore. Success was waking up each morning knowing I was doing what I loved, with the person I loved by my side. Success was no longer being haunted by the past, no longer letting old wounds define who I was. Success was being able to look in the mirror and say, "I'm truly happy." Ryan walked into the room with a soft smile. "Ready for lunch, Mrs. Carter?" I laughed and stood up. "Never been more ready." He wrapped his arm around my waist, and together we walked out, stepping into the rhythm of a city I once called unfamiliar, but now it was home. The past was behind me, and I was finally free. Life doesn't always go according to plan. Sometimes, the pain and betrayal we experience push us beyond our limits and help us grow. Julia once thought she needed her family's approval, but in the end, she realized her true worth came from within. Her story isn't one of revenge, but of growth, love, and building a life to be proud of. Sometimes, the best thing we can do is let go of the past and move forward. What do you think about Julia's journey? If you were in her shoes, how would you face your past? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to follow the channel for more stories about life, family, and powerful lessons worth remembering. I stood frozen in front of the kitchen door, every word from my mother slicing through me like invisible blades. "Julia's not right for you. You deserve someone better," my mother, Evelyn, said calmly, as if she were discussing the weather. "You know, Rachel has always been ambitious, a strong woman. She's not a dreamer like Julia." My hands clenched into fists without me realizing. On the other side of the door, my boyfriend, William, who had been with me for the past 3 years, said nothing. No denial, no awkward chuckle to lighten the mood, just silence. Then, a sigh. "Julia and I have been together for a long time," William said, his voice trailing off like even he wasn't sure anymore. My mother let out a soft laugh, a sound that weighed heavily on my chest. "But think about it. What have you accomplished in the last 3 years? Rachel, on the other hand, just got promoted to department head. Don't you see the difference? Rachel, my sister, the family's golden child, the one my mother never stopped comparing me to. I had known since I was little that in her eyes, I was just a faint shadow next to Rachel. I chose to pursue art. something my mother always saw as meaningless. To her, I was just someone chasing fanciful dreams with no real future. I leaned closer, peeking through the crack in the door. William was still holding the 2 sodas I had asked him to bring for us, but now he seemed to have forgotten I was waiting. He was listening to my mother. No objections? No defense? Instead, he nodded slowly. I saw his eyes shift, from hesitant to thoughtful. A deep ache spread through my chest, making it hard to stay on my feet. I wanted to rush in, to scream, to ask William why he was letting her words get to him. But I didn't. I turned away, trying to steady my steps. That whole evening, I smiled and acted like nothing had happened. That was my first mistake. The changes didn't come all at once, but they were subtle enough for me to notice. William started bringing up Rachel in our conversations. Things like, "Rachel had an important meeting today," or, "Did you hear Rachel just got nominated for an award at work?" became common. At first, I thought he was just trying to get closer to my family. But slowly, I began to notice the look in his eyes when he talked about my sister. Respect. Admiration. Then came the canceled dates. More and more of them. His apologies still sounded sincere, but something felt off. When I asked him about the texts between him and Rachel, the ones I hadn't heard about before, he just smiled. "We just ran into each other in the city," William said casually. "She's your family, Julia. Are we not allowed to talk?" I stayed quiet, convincing myself I was overthinking, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being left out whenever we had dinner with my family. William and Rachel shared something, an invisible bond I couldn't reach. The way they looked at each other, the subtle smiles only they seemed to understand. I felt like a stranger in my own relationship. And then one day, the truth hit me in the worst way. That day, I decided to surprise William. We used to dream about going to a concert by his favorite band, and I finally got the tickets. I wanted to see the joy in his eyes again, to remember what it felt like when we were happy. I still had the key to his apartment. We had planned to move in together next year. When I opened the door, I immediately knew something was wrong. A familiar beige coat hanging by the hook, a pair of high heels I never wore sitting by the bed. And then, I heard laughter. The bedroom door was slightly ajar, but what I saw inside was unmistakable. Rachel was leaning into William, her eyes shining with satisfaction. When I dropped the tickets onto the floor, they finally noticed I was there. I saw panic in William's eyes, but Rachel was different. She wasn't flustered. She didn't even bother hiding it. "Julia," she said, her voice calm and cold. "You were going to find out, sooner or later." I stood there, feeling something inside me shatter. But I didn't cry. No, I wasn't going to cry in front of them. I tightened my fists and turned away. The anger would come later, but right then, all I felt was emptiness. But I stood in my mother's spotless kitchen, facing her, searching for a trace of remorse in her eyes. But all I saw was a cold indifference. "You're overreacting, Julia," my mother said, her voice so calm it gave me chills. She stirred her cup of Earl Grey tea gently, as if this conversation was nothing of importance. "Relationships end all the time. You can't cling to something like that forever." It felt like someone had slapped me in the face. "Really? You're talking about my 3-year relationship like it's worth nothing?" My voice trembled with anger, but my mother just sighed and set her tea down. "You've always been a dreamer, Julia," she said, giving me that judgmental look. "You're not practical. You have no clear goals. Rachel and William are different. They have ambition, direction. Who can you blame but yourself?" I blinked, trying to stay composed. For the first time in my life, I looked at my mother not as the woman who gave birth to me, but as a stranger. Someone who had never truly seen me as her daughter. "I think I understand now," I said, my voice dry. "You never really believed in me, did you?" She didn't deny it. I turned and walked out of the house. And I wasn't going back. I left Philadelphia just 1 week later. My old car was packed with suitcases and cardboard boxes, the remnants of 3 years with William, of a childhood spent trying to win my mother's approval, of all the memories I wished I could forget. My destination? Chicago. No solid plan, no job waiting, just a modest savings account from part-time jobs and a burning desire to start over. It was raining when I arrived. Streetlights reflected in the puddles like glittering mirrors, and towering buildings loomed above me like silent giants. I found a cheap motel in a rundown part of town, where the tiny room smelled musty and the curtains were faded, but at least it was mine. No more William, no more Mom, no more Rachel. Just me and the life ahead. Those first days were anything but easy. I sent out job applications everywhere, from coffee shops to administrative assistant positions. But art wasn't exactly a lucrative field, and my experience didn't help much when trying to break into something entirely different. My savings kept dwindling, and I began to worry. I took a job as a waitress at a small cafe, spending long days on my feet with aching legs. But at least I had enough money to get by. I still remember the first time I stepped into the office building that would change my future forever. It was day 33 in Chicago. I had just enough money to pay rent for 1 more month, and I knew I needed a better job. By chance, while handing out flyers for the cafe, I overheard a group talking about an open position at a financial investment firm. No experience needed, just organizational skills and the ability to handle pressure. I quickly jotted down the address. The next day, I walked into the sleek glass building with a resume in hand. The receptionist gave me a once-over, from my discount store business dress to the worn-out purse I clutched tightly. "Do you have an appointment?" "I heard there's an opening for an administrative assistant," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. She picked up the phone, had a short exchange, then looked back at me. "Please, wait over there." I sat down, my palms damp with sweat. This was the first real opportunity I'd had. I couldn't let it slip away. 30 minutes later, a woman with neatly tied brown hair stepped out. "I'm Carol, head of HR," she said, shaking my hand. "Julia, right? I just reviewed your application. We're looking for an assistant for one of our young financial analysts, but it's a high-pressure role." "I'm not afraid of a challenge," I said immediately. She studied me carefully. Why would someone with an arts background want to work in this field? I took a deep breath and answered as honestly as I could. Because sometimes, to start over, you have to step out of your comfort zone and try something completely new. She was silent for a moment, then nodded. "All right, come with me. I'll introduce you to the person you'd be working with, if you're selected." I followed her down a long hallway into an office flooded with paperwork and cold LED lighting. The man sitting at the desk looked up as we entered. "Julia, this is Ryan Carter," Carol introduced. "He's the one you'll be assisting if you get the job." Ryan reached out to shake my hand. "Welcome to the world of finance, Julia." I took his hand, feeling as though a new door had just opened in front of me. I had left the past behind. And now, I was ready to write the next chapter of my life. Working at Carter & Associates wasn't easy, but I had never felt more like I belonged anywhere. Ryan Carter was the kind of boss people both respected and feared. He worked at a relentless pace, setting high standards for himself and everyone around him. In the early days of being his assistant, I made plenty of mistakes, forgetting to attach files to emails, scheduling meetings at the wrong times, even spilling coffee on his desk. But instead of getting angry, Ryan just looked at me, lifted the stack of papers, and sighed. "Julia, if you're planning to stick around, at least try to spill coffee on the less important documents," he said, dryly but not unkindly. I blushed. "I'll do my best." And I really did. After a few weeks, I started to get the rhythm of the job. I learned to anticipate Ryan's needs before he said a word, organized his schedule to maximize efficiency, and, most importantly, I began to understand how he thought. He wasn't just a talented financial investor. He was a visionary. Our quick lunches became opportunities for me to learn from him. "Why did you invest in that company instead of a bigger one?" I asked as he reviewed a funding deal for a clean energy startup. Ryan raised an eyebrow and set down his coffee. Because they have passion. I don't just invest in ideas, I invest in people. For the first time, I realized the world of finance wasn't just about cold numbers. It was about seeing potential, evaluating character, and believing in the right things. Over time, our relationship slowly moved beyond the confines of work. Late nights at the office turned into deep conversations about life. I told him about Philadelphia, my mother, Rachel, and William. Ryan didn't pity me, and he didn't offer empty reassurances. He just listened, nodding now and then. Maybe you had to leave them behind to find yourself, he said one late night as we shared takeout over his desk. I didn't reply, but his words stayed with me all night. One evening, when work had finally slowed down, we sat together on the rooftop of the office building, watching the lights of Chicago flicker below. Why did you choose this field? I asked. Ryan leaned back in his chair, eyes distant. My dad owned a small business, but he never had the right financial support. In the end, it went under, and I watched my family lose everything. He gave a faint smile. I wanted to create a place where small businesses could find the kind of help my dad never had. I sat there quietly. Maybe, deep down, we weren't so different. In the days that followed, I noticed the way Ryan looked at me had changed. It wasn't the analytical gaze of a boss toward his assistant anymore. It was something warmer, more personal. And then, on a Friday night after a long week of tense investment meetings, he said, "Want to grab dinner?" I blinked. You mean as boss and assistant? Ryan gave a soft smile. As Ryan and Julia. That dinner had nothing to do with work. We talked about music, our favorite movies, and all the simple things we'd never had time to mention before. And when Ryan walked me all the way to my apartment door, I knew everything had changed. What we had wasn't some blazing fire from the start. It was a slow, steady warmth, like a comforting flame in the middle of a cold winter. But just when I thought I'd finally found where I belonged, Ryan made a proposal that shook me. "I'm leaving the company," he said during a late meeting. I froze. What? I want to start my own investment firm, a place where we can support sustainable businesses with real value. But I don't want to do it alone. I swallowed hard. What are you saying? Ryan looked at me, eyes steady. I want you to come with me. In that moment, I knew my life was standing at another crossroads. I could stay here, keep a stable job, or I could take a leap all over again. This time, not to escape the past, but to build the future I truly wanted. I looked him straight in the eye. Then where do we start?